Yeah, yeah, of course. And thanks for the intro, Karen. Angelica's a good friend of mine, and I love Cal, so not a problem to be here. But yeah, I'm Brian. I am currently an APMM or Associate Product Marketing Manager at Google, and I graduated from Cal Law School of Business, BS Business Administration in 2020. So part of the COVID generation. Didn't get to walk until a couple of weeks ago. But actually, my first job out of college was with Accenture in strategy consulting. And then I actually laterally transferred and hired into the Google APMM program. But before Accenture and before Google, I actually interned with JP Morgan in tech investment banking. So I've done a lot of hopping around in different fields, especially in business school. We have the ABCs, accounting, banking, consulting. So I got a taste of everything and realized I didn't like any of it. So I ultimately made my way into marketing and marketing in tech. But before even that, before full time, before internships, I was heavily involved in the Daily Californian. I was the marketing manager, and was also in a consulting club, Berkeley Consulting. Um, and yeah, happy to answer any and all questions, and really happy to be a part of this.
Great, thank you, Brian. So today's session is going to be an hour. So I'll go ahead and start with asking a few questions regarding Brian's role in primary and product marketing. And it's great that you also have experience in some of other popular fields, other business-minded students would be interested in. So I would be also asking questions in your previous experience as well. So and then we will go ahead and ask you questions regarding recruiting tips, and so a lot of students ask questions at the second half of today's event. All right. So I know that Brian, you already touched a little bit of your career path. Can you share us a little detailed rundown of your experience at Cal and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I entered Cal in 2016, I actually was intended political science. I was actually like an intended poli sci major. But a lot of my friends and a lot of my mentors were in consulting clubs. A lot of them were heavily involved in Haas. So as you can imagine, very easy to fall down that rabbit hole. So I joined a consulting club my first year in my first semester, and very quickly learned that there was a whole world in Haas and like within business. So quickly shed my poli sci intended major and then pursued Haas and econ. Was lucky enough to get into Haas, and then from there, I think just a combination of the coursework and being heavily involved in business clubs on campus, as well as like a very, I think, like intentional focus on like summer internships and recruiting, kind of led me to where I am today. I think one thing I love to share with new grads and college students that coffee chat with me is that it's really easy to buy into the pressure. I think, especially if you're a Haas student, especially if you're in a consulting club or a business frat, it is so easy and so tempting to kind of just do what your peers do and kind of follow into that accounting, banking, consulting path. I learned the hard way that these were fields that I did not really love and did not really love me. And I think, to be fair, I was very fortunate and very privileged to have these experiences. And I think one of the greatest things an internship can teach you is what you love, and maybe more importantly, what you don't love. So I definitely encourage everybody, as you're kind of going through Cal, make the most of your time. Definitely chat with people and build relationships with people that you may not otherwise meet. So kind of extend your social circles beyond Haas, beyond business clubs. Definitely get to know a bit more of the wider community at Cal. And no matter what internship you do, definitely like throw yourself into the thick of it, because you'll learn maybe that you love it or maybe that you don't. And I think all those experiences kind of informed me as I kind of ping ponged through banking, did not like it, spent a year in consulting, did not like it, and now I'm at Google. Safe to say I'm a much happier, and I think I actually really enjoy the work I do, and happy to speak about kind of what the nuances are and what the distinctions and differences are between banking, consulting, and now product and product marketing. But I think I would not be where I am today if I did not have an open mind, and if I didn't have the privilege to kind of explore all these amazing opportunities.
Mhm. Great, thank you, Brian. So I'm glad your experience working in consulting and also investment banking built up the transferable skill set for product marketing role. So to begin with, can you tell us a little bit what does product marketing actually do? So we a lot students are interested in marketing, but more traditional company marketing. So how is it different from the traditional company marketing?
Yeah, great question. So, marketing is a very vague term that's thrown around sometimes in business. A marketer in Coca Cola may have a completely different role from like a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon and vice versa. And the way I like to think about it is I usually divide marketing into four different like core sub pillars. So one is product marketing, another is digital marketing, the third is brand marketing, and then third and finally is PR and communications. So the way I like to think about it is product marketing actually incorporates all the other pillars of marketing. So it truly is the most strategic and cross-functional within all the marketing roles because as you're building a product, you will have to touch its brand and own it. Digital marketing is all about campaigns. So I think when people think about marketing, they probably mostly think about digital marketing. So running media campaigns, social media, influencer marketing, growth marketing, performance marketing, that's all under the umbrella of digital marketing. And of course, as a product marketer, you have to understand and know those tools. So you have to have the digital marketing chops. And then, of course, you work very extensively with publications, news agencies, marketing agencies in general. So a strong grasp of PR and strategic comms is really important. So the way I like to think about it is product marketers have to do it all in terms of the marketing spectrum. And then even more, because a huge part of the product marketing umbrella is the strategy and actually working with engineers, designers, and product managers and actually scoping and building out the product. In a nutshell, though, to hopefully this doesn't confuse or stress people out, but I think in a nutshell, what a good product marketer does is you represent the voice of customer. So you have to have an incredibly strong, intimate understanding of who are your target users, what are their wants and needs, how do you communicate all that raw, valuable data to proper stakeholders, such as the engineers and designers who build the products, to the product managers who kind of manage that development process, as well as the sales teams that actually go out in the field and sell said product to your end users. So, in a nutshell, a PMM or a product marketer has to kind of go across the marketing umbrella. So, you need a wide variety of skill sets. And I think part of the job of being a product marketer is you don't need to know everything. I certainly did not, coming from a consulting and finance background. A lot of times for a company like Google or Facebook, they actually train these skills. So really, I think, and I may be getting ahead of the questions, but I really think you don't need to have all these skills. You don't even need to have half of them. Honestly, you just need to have a growth mindset and the intellectual curiosity to really throw yourself into the work and pick up these skills as you go. And Google and Facebook have unlimited budget for training and for curriculum. So not knowing these skills is not a problem, but not having the hunger or the attitude to learn these skills would be. And I think that's really the core, I would say, skill or temperament Google and other companies look for in future product marketers.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So you already touched a little bit about the third question, explaining to us who do you work with, and then yeah, product marketing is definitely a cross-functional role. And then you mentioned some skills that can be trained when you actually start the job, but in a recruiting process, you want to show that you have the potential, right? So what do you think are the skills needed to thrive in a cross-functional team?
Honestly, I feel like when I was in college, I was so stressed out thinking like I have to have like XYZ. Like I have to take this marketing class and I have to take this core class and I have to like pick up SQL or Stata or some like technical language. The truth is those things definitely help, but also the truth is you definitely don't need them. Um, I come from a very analytical and strategic background from finance and consulting. I don't know how to use Figma or like other creative tools. And when it comes to like working with our designers and with our social media team to actually create like copy and creatives for social media posts, for instance, one of the work streams I'm leading is we're in the middle of a product launch and I'm owning the social media strategy. It's like I'm actually learning for the first time how to use like Canva and like design social media posts. You don't need to have any of those skills coming into the job. Having them is definitely a great selling point. But I really think the key thing is being intellectually curious and having a hunger for learning and picking up these skills. That being said, I would say coming into like an interview or coming into the recruiting process, definitely some table stakes skills are, I would say number one is extracurriculars. So involvement in a club beyond just being a general member. So really being a leader within the club and within your community, really being someone who is proactive and engages or directly builds upon a project or initiative for said club. So being a leader, that could be formal through the title like VP, president, like committee chair, or it could be informal. You could be a general member, but if you were proactive in spearheading a new project or initiative and can kind of walk the interviewer through that story, that's also an amazing story for leadership. Google in particular actually has two things we assess candidates on. So number one is leadership. The second one is googliness. You may notice that there's kind of a lack of like technical skills, and that's deliberate. I think any good company should strive to build a team that does not necessarily bias itself to a particular background. So if you want to be a software engineer, okay, yeah, there's probably less wiggle room. Like you probably need to know like Python and other key programming languages. But to be a marketer, to be like a really good marketer, you don't have to know specific like tactical skills within marketing because those can all be taught. What you can't be taught is leadership. I think that's really built and cultivated over time. You can't be taught creativity, and you can't be taught teamwork and the ability to work with diverse audiences, diverse teammates, not just from different ethnic or cultural backgrounds, but also academic, professional backgrounds and lived experiences. I think the ability to work across very diverse and broad teams and the ability to create impact for your org, for your community, I think those are the things that Google really looks for. In my cohort class, for instance, 20 of us joined this year. I would say 5 of us are from ex consulting backgrounds, and some have never had a job in their lives. Some have never been ever been an intern. Other folks have worked in like media and ad agencies. Some folks, one was actually like a comic book artist. So I think hopefully that gives you kind of a good breath on the skills you need, which to be quite frank are none. You just really need to come in with a hungry attitude and great stories to tell about leadership and teamwork. It doesn't even have to be marketing focused. Um, Honestly, some of the greatest marketers and some of the greatest marketing leaders at Google did not come from marketing backgrounds. And I think that culture of openness and openness of like hiring and recruiting folks who do not come from traditional backgrounds is very emblematic, I would say, in the world of tech, but especially at Google.
Thank you. So you explained a little bit about what product marketers do, and I'm sure a lot of part of your work has been enjoyable. But what would you identify the most and least enjoyable part, and how do you navigate the least enjoyable part?
Most enjoyable will be easy. I'm like in the Google office right now, so I gotta make sure I'm not talking too loudly. But I would say for most enjoyable, I would say honestly the people, and that's so cliche. But I feel like I am cynical because I came from like investment banking where the hopefully this is not too mean. I'm sure there are amazing people. There are very kind people in investment banking. That was not my experience. Brilliant people, smart people, hardworking people, but a very competitive culture. And I consider myself competitive, but not cutthroat. And I think there is a difference. Um, and with even within consulting, again, very similar shades and colors. Um, I would say what's so different about like the tech world is even though people are incredibly driven and ambitious and competitive, I would say there really is a strong emphasis on actually investing in junior talent. So I have one-on-ones with my manager every single week. I have one-on-ones with the VP of marketing who like oversees 10,000 people and she still makes time for me. Granted, I'm working on a key work stream that heavily involves her, but I think she doesn't need to go out of her way to schedule time to talk to me or to give me like really great homegrown, detailed, actionable advice on what it's like to be promoted, what it takes to be promoted at Google, and how to be more active in scoping out leadership opportunities, even if you're just 6 months on the job. I think another thing I really like about the work is the people are not only incredibly willing to invest in you, but they'll actually give you ownership of key tasks. So we're in the middle of a product launch. And one of the key work streams I'm leading, like I mentioned, is social media piece. No experience whatsoever in social media. Um, my Instagram handle, I think I have like less than like 500 followers on Instagram. So like not the person you want to go to like curate, spearhead, and define your social media strategy for a new product launch. They still give me that work stream, and it's been a blast learning a lot about the creative and the copy process. Uh, and it's really exciting because if you actually have like small plugin, I can't really talk about the product, but if you tune in to Think with Google and our Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter accounts, from October 18th to October 22nd, I'll be taking over. So all those posts will actually be written by me, which is really fun because I have no experience whatsoever, but my team is like, I think the people at Google are so experimental and they're willing to take a chance on new talent. And I think it's very rare for someone right out of college to have that experience, to have that responsibility. Um, I think that's my favorite part about the job. I think if you come in with a hungry attitude and if you come in with a visible excitement and passion for what you do, people will invest in you and they will let you shine. Now, what's the least enjoyable thing about Google? I would say, honestly, and this is I think this is just run of the mill for any big company, especially for like a large company like Google that has like a 200K plus employees. I think when you work at a really large company, it is so easy to get so lost in the sauce. Google has like 100 different products. Across those products, there's probably thousands and thousands of employees, and that's just marketing. We're not even going into like finance, like FP&A, financial planning analysis, or corporate development, or sales, or program management, product management, engineering, design. Even within engineering, there's like different teams like Android, like anyways, this is all to say it is very easy to get lost at a big company. And I think especially during COVID-19, especially in a virtual environment, as I'm sure everybody knows, like in college, it's really easy to get lost because there's no guiding force. There's nobody to really hold your hands. And I would say when you're at a big environment like Google, you actually do need someone to hold your hands and teach you the ropes. So I'd say the hardest part about the job is learning a lot of things on your own. My manager and the VP and like a lot of senior leaders will come in and they'll give great advice on like working at the company. But when it comes to like navigating health insurance or like filing taxes, benefits, like that, you're on your own. And you would imagine that Google like would do a better job kind of facilitating that process. But for a newly minted adult, a lot of these things, there's no instruction guide. So you have to do your job on top of kind of like figuring out all these logistical things. I would say that's the least enjoyable part of the job. And I think that's run of the mill at any big company, but I think especially at Google, it can be very disorganized at times. And it's really on you, the individual, to be proactive in scoping your responsibilities and getting your work done.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So that's kind of a when you are about to graduate and start working, that's you have your new role, and then you have to learn to live a real adult life, right?
Yeah.
I know, Brian, you just started at Google not long ago, but have you already worked on a project that you feel you make an impact?
Yeah. So I could talk actually a bit about what we're doing right now. So if this was held like 2 months like from now, I would be able to give you a lot more color and actually talk about the product. But right now we're in the middle of product launch. And on top of owning social, I'm also owning sales enablement and the overarching strategic unification process behind the product launch. So what does that actually mean? Strategic unification is a term that Google uses to basically describe cross-functional collaboration and management. So I basically have to lead the brand team and have them share their creative and their assets with the sales team when we're building out emails that go out to like end users and that go out to like agencies and sellers. So basically making sure that everything is aligned and unified across every single possible lever. I'm oversimplifying a lot of things because, quite frankly, it would probably take the next hour and would probably bore you all to death if I actually went into the nitty gritty details. But basically, kind of going into the piece of like, what does cross functional stakeholder management like actually mean? I still don't know. It's very vague, but in a nutshell, like a TLDR, basically, there are so many decision makers that come across in a product launch. You have legal, you have a team of like in-house like counsel, like lawyers at Google, like making sure that we're not violating any laws. As you may know, like Google, Facebook, Amazon are definitely repeat infractioners when it comes to violating certain things. So it's a very like important that like legally speaking, Google is on top of its game. Then of course you have sales, who's mostly invested in how do we sell this to our customers, to our end users, who are our partners, what is that process like, and how does that tie in with brand and creative? How do we make sure that sales teams are not communicating the wrong thing, using the wrong image? So cross-functional management sounds a lot less sexy when you think about it because a lot of it is like project management. But again, incredibly important when it comes to actually implementing the product launch itself. And then another piece of the work, like I mentioned, is sales enablement. So another role that PMMs play, product marketing managers play, is you understand the customer and you build the materials that excite, entice, and attract the end user. But then you give that off. You kind of give your baby off to the sales team that actually goes out into the field and then entices, wins over, and tracks said customers. Because the PMM, we have very limited time and we're not able to do all of it. So the sales teams handle the execution piece. And one piece that I'm leading is actually creating all the sales activation guides and playbooks. That way, we educate and inform sellers. This is the strategy. This is what the product is. Here's the end user. Here's how you communicate with them. Here's a sales template. Kind of giving them like a walkthrough, step-by-step guide on how to actually activate, educate, and ultimately win over the end customer. So those are the three work streams that I'm leading. And it's really interesting because on my first week at Google, I started in June. My manager said, how do you feel about being thrown into this right away? And I said, being thrown into what? And here we are. So I would say, again, um, at a company like Google, and I would say especially at a tech company, the sky's the limit. And I think how much you could own and how much you could take over is definitely up to you. Um, this is probably not the most kosher advice for a group of college students. But typically, I think among new grads, you quickly learn that it's very easy to skate by if you work at a Google or a Facebook. And by skate by, I mean like do the bare minimum. Um, I'm not anybody's boss, and I'm not going to tell you like what you should do. I think at Berkeley, we're just like grown to constantly like compete and grind and study and work. But once you like get employed by a company like Google, it is criminally easy to coast by and just do the bare minimum. I encourage you, like, if that's what you want to do, go for it. Don't say that in the interview. But I would honestly say, like, if you do want to be proactive, if you do want to own more than what a new grad could reasonably be given, Google is absolutely a company that gives that responsibility to junior folks. And I would say at Google, like, you could either coast by or you could really grind. And I'm really happy that I took the latter approach because there's so many awesome things I'm learning that usually you'd have to be like 5 or 10 years on the job to do. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question and more.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So yeah, Google has been, I think, one of the top dream company for a lot of business-minded students now. But then I think a lot of students are also curious about how to get in. So I think we already touched a little bit about this, but can you briefly tell us what skill sets, particularly in your investment banking consulting experience, those are transferable for a product marketing role?
Yeah, the $1 million question, like, how do you get in? I would say to answer the first part of the question, um, I don't want to say you. I really don't want to say that nothing I did in my past lives, I'm like transferring into my role. Um, but to be perfectly honest, I would say maybe some key skills that are universal across any role. Number one is storytelling. I think especially in marketing, but in investment banking and in consulting, you're constantly pitching, selling, developing strategies, recommendations. And a part of the recommendation is the story behind it. Without going into too much details, I think storytelling and the ability to tell a defined story from beginning, middle to end with action recommendations, takeaways, best practices, and learnings is, I think, a key skill. And the greatest thing is you don't need to be a business major or econ major to have storytelling skills. I think storytelling is endemic to any major or to any academic concentration. I would say really the key components of any good story, right, is who is the target audience, what is your key objective, and then from there, kind of the actions and kind of the actual recommendations fall in line, but with that additional context to really set the stage, uh, that really matters. Because if you're telling a story that's intended for, let's say, the sales team, but you're using design language, or you're an engineer and you're using engineering language, your audience is not going to understand what you're saying. So the ability to really put yourself in your audience's shoes, the ability to be an empathetic storyteller and an empathetic problem solver is definitely key in product marketing. I would say another transferable skill is then how do you actually put pen to the paper and how do you actually tell the story? So it's not just the strategy of the story, it's the actual execution and implementation. So of course there are tools like PowerPoint, the bread and butter for investment banking and consulting. Um, for Google in particular, there is no PowerPoint or Word. There are slides, sheets, and Google Docs. So it's crazy actually, because I think us, like, for college students, you probably use slides and docs more than you do PowerPoint. So you probably actually have a homegrown advantage already. So the ability to like actually create beautiful slides and the ability to put pen to the paper and actually tell a story, definitely very important. Um, but honestly, I would say that's it. Like there are other soft skills like analytical problem solving, um, But again, I consider that soft because that's not a technical skill, not technical in the sense that like R or Python are. But I would say in terms of like soft skills, always asking questions, no matter how dumb they are. I know everybody says that. And I definitely had that fear whenever I'm in a meeting, like, oh God, like, was that a dumb question? Um, in consulting companies and investment banks, there are dumb questions. Avoid those. But at a Google and in a more like welcoming environment, there are no dumb questions. Like, and I truly mean that. So do not be afraid to ask questions. Do not be afraid to be active during meetings to set the stage and set up context. Chances are somebody else is wondering the exact same thing you are. So I think being proactive, I would say another soft skill is networking. So I always joke about this with my friends. You network more when you graduate from college than you do when you're in college. The key to success in business, especially, is even when you're on the job, you're constantly building relationships, not just with the folks in your team, but beyond. Especially in consulting, investment banking, you have to work with a client and you have to work with other teams in your firm. But again, more relevantly, at a Google or in product marketing, the job by nature requires you to interact very closely and very intimately with engineers, designers, product managers, salesmen and women, program managers, lawyers, even. So by nature and by function, you are constantly talking to folks. You're constantly building relationships. So having a love for building relationships is really key. And this is coming from an introvert. People are always surprised when I tell them I'm an introvert. I may seem really extroverted, but honestly, even if you're an introvert, I would say introverts make the best networkers because I would say a good networking session is 80% listening, 20% talking. The more you listen and the more you kind of soak in and engage with the person, have it be more of a conversation and not a lecture, which ironically is kind of right now. That's like the best kind of coffee chat. It's one where you're actively engaging with the person and asking questions and being proactive rather than reactive. But yeah, I would say all in all, those are the transferable skills. I would say coming in from my previous lives into what I'm doing right now.
Thank you, Brian. Those are very candid sharings. So you mentioned storytelling. I think I always try to tell students you have to tell stories in your resume and cover letter if some companies did read it. But from your recruiting experience, how is your experience and your tips would provide to students who get their resume and cover letter notice?
Yeah, definitely. My tips, I will kind of like bucket them into two groups. One is like general best practices. So regardless of what role you're applying to, these are good practices. And then the other bucket will be like more Google specific. So if you want to apply to Google into the APMM program, whether it's full-time or the bold internship, that's probably going to be a bit more tailored and specific for you. But in general, number one advice that everybody hates when I tell them is you do need to tailor your resume. I know it's very tempting to kind of send the same resume over and over again. Companies are not dumb. In the resume screening phase, there's actually two stages. The first one is an AI or the ATS scan, just text scrapes your resume along with thousands of others in the bucket. And then if you pass that, you go to the human phase where like an actual human recruiter looks at your resume. Now, in the first phase for the ATS scan, it's very important that your resume matches the language of the job description. So being very intentional and kind of customizing your resume to incorporate the language of the job position. So for Google APMM, there are actually very specific bullet points we use in our job posting page, incorporating that language into your bullet points and kind of showcasing how your experiences line up to the actual job at hand will definitely make your resume stand out. And it'll automatically be flagged to a human recruiter and to the hiring team that will then actually like physically look at your resume. And again, if you customize it and if you take a lot of time and carefully designing and customizing it, like the people we know, I'm actually part of the hiring committee, like in the APM program, and it's very easy. Like we actually have training sessions where we look at like, you know, resumes like across the years. It's very easy to see what a generic resume looks like from something where a student actually took time to kind of curate and spec that resume for that position. It's very easy to tell. And honestly, it just takes 10 minutes more of your time to kind of like customize it through. My second general advice is impact driven, not process driven. It's very like I actually like back in Cal, like on clubs, I've probably reviewed more than 1,000 resumes at this point, and I think it's very easy to see what resume is process driven, where it's very passive. And an example of a bullet point could be supported VP with marketing plan or something like that. It's very passive. You're talking about a process, whereas your bullet point should be more impact driven. So instead of talking about like a marketing plan, or instead of talking about like helped oversee and manage social media page for XYZ small business, instead of doing that, you should be impact driven and kind of tell me the so what. So if like that bullet point is like managing a social media page for like a company as an intern, instead you should be impact driven and say like generated like XYZ impressions over ABC time frame, delivering a 25% subscriber growth year over year by managing client social media page. So you could still keep that process, but it's at the very end and at the very front of the bullet point. You want to very clearly describe with using numbers and business metrics what impact you had in that role. A second follow-up question I get is, what if I don't have those numbers? That's very common. I think this could be for a number of reasons. If you're an intern at like a Wells Fargo, some of that data might be proprietary. If you're at a club, maybe you just don't do a good job like documenting those numbers, which one you should. But two, if you don't have hard metrics, I definitely would lean into soft metrics. So hard metrics are stuff you could get from Google Analytics. It's stuff like impressions, views, session duration, burn rate, bounce rate, revenues generated, sales generated, income, etc. So those are like hard, concrete numbers. Soft metrics are things that are not as impact driven, but they're more operational. So led XYZ teammates in scoping and defining like go to market strategy for XYZ client or something like that. So it's a soft metric because it doesn't detail like an end result, but you're still showing a number to really breathe that bullet point and breathe that story into life. Other soft metrics like include like how like for social media, again, it's like how many posts you created or how many posts you drafted, how many followers you have. Like those are like things that you could glean no matter what, because they're not, you knew how many posts you wrote. That's not like proprietary data. So again, whenever you can, use hard metrics to really define and bring your stories to life. When you can't, use softer metrics, because again, the human eye is drawn to numbers. When like put yourself in the recruiter's shoes and you're reviewing 1,000+ resumes in a week, all equally talented, smart, driven students from Cal with amazing stories to tell. Very easy though, as you can imagine, all those resumes start to bleed together, especially if you follow like the classic like New York Times, like name, summary, like experiences, like it all blends together, right? So you really want your bullet points in the first 10 seconds of them reading it to say, wow, like I could clearly see what impact this student had in his or her organization. Mm-hmm. And the best way you can do that is through numbers. So those are my two general tips. Google in particular, we actually score resumes on 2 dimensions. Like I mentioned before, one is leadership, the other is Googliness. We do not look for particular hard skills unless it's for engineering. But for marketing, we do not look for marketing in your resume. We don't look for like product marketing, heavens forbid. What we really look for is leadership and Googliness. Leadership could be in a cultural club. It could be for like Polynesian like grass skirt dancing. Like I don't care what it is. You have like all stories are amazing in the sense that if you're passionate about it, and if you could walk us through what it's like leading an initiative, like building real bonds, relationships with your peers, with your classmates, and creating a positive impact for your team and for Cal and the wider community as a whole. That's what we really care about. It doesn't have to be business oriented per se. It could be cultural. It could be sports, intramural. It could be really anything. My tip usually for folks is if you have fun talking about it, it's going to look good on your resume. Don't worry about what you think looks good. Worry about what you want to talk about, because those are the stories that shine the brightest in a resume. And during an interview, very easy for us to scope out when you're bullshitting and when you're talking about something you're actually genuinely invested in. And that really does make the difference. So that's leadership. The other one is Googliness. What does that actually mean? I think every company has a term to describe like, oh, we're quirky, like we're cool, we're Googlers. This is all to say, I think Googliness is like being entrepreneurial. It's being proactive. It's being experimental. I think above all, I hate to draw back on like the 4 pillars of Haas. It's challenging the status quo. I would say like that's probably the best way you could frame Googliness. It's you solving a problem that no one has dared to solve before, in a way that no one has done before. I think that's what Googliness is. I'm going to leave that deliberately vague because I think you will do a better job describing that than I ever could. But as you're going through your resume, googliness, leadership, those are the two qualities, those are the two dimensions you really want to evaluate your resume on. Um, and again, don't stress about like not having like any internships or like any business club experience or any consulting club experience, like especially consulting club experience or business rats. Like you do not need any of those. This is coming from someone who comes from that background. Like it's actually pretty funny how irrelevant that is. What to me, I think what stood out to my recruiting process for both IB consulting and then at Google is when you talk about things you want to talk about, and when the interviewer like actually leans in and asks you follow-up questions instead of going off a script, that's when you know the interview is going really well. Um, I actually had the most fun talking about like the Daily Cal in my interviews, and I had the most fun talking about like the socials we had and talking about like building a culture at my team because at the Daily Cal, like the team I like helped led and built did not even exist. So talking about like team building, talking about like making lasting friendships, talking about like building a culture and what that actually means, like that's what I had fun doing. And a lot of my interviewers picked up on that, and we just talked about that for 30 minutes straight. And they didn't even ask me the other questions. So that's not to say that every interview experience could go that well, but in general, talk about what you want to talk about what you love talking about, no matter how silly it seems, because I guarantee you, that's going to sound way better than you droning on about, oh, we helped like Google and this client consulting engagement. Like, unless you're really passionate about that. If you are, go for that. But talk about what you want to talk about because the interview is like kind of in your court. Uh, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but really, like, I think if there's any TLDR from this session, it's we're so pressured and so kind of like driven to impress people and to talk about things that we think will impress people. But trust me, like, especially with tech companies and at Google, it's very easy to see through that. So talk about the things you want to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a very comprehensive answer, and also you touch the interview part. So my next question is regarding right now a lot of students are asking regarding referral. I think you have been in investment banking. You certainly have that experience to massive networking. Would it still matters if you would like to work in tech? So would you recommend cold calling people, both recruiters and then the employees of the role that you are interested in applying?
Yeah. I would say for consulting and investment banking, actually more for investment banking, not so much for consulting. For
Mm-hmm.
investment banking, cold networking is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Like in your clubs or orgs, if you have any alumni who work at these firms, great initial point of contact. But even just reaching out on LinkedIn and just just connecting and sending a connection request to a Cal alum at a company in a position that you want to learn more about, honestly, you'd be surprised how well that could work. When I was in New York in 2018, I was interning with Comcast, NBC Universal, and I think in that summer alone, I talked to like 100 different alumni over the span of 2.5 months. Granted, I probably sent like 1,000 connection requests, and maybe like 10% like actually went through, and then of that 10%, maybe half went well, and the other half just was horrific and just embarrassing. I don't want to think about it. And then of that half, like I'm really close with like maybe half of those folks. But even then, like there's like 20 folks like am still like a really close contact with, like brother. I consider them brothers and sisters, like lifelong friends and mentors. One of them is actually getting married a couple months from now, and I'm helping him plan the actual wedding, which is like surreal and it's really exciting. But this is all to say, like cold networking seems really tough, and it absolutely is. But you don't know if you don't try, and you'd be surprised by like how like beautiful like the relationships could be if you just take that chance and if that person takes a chance on you. For consulting firms do a much better job sourcing candidates through target schools like UC Berkeley. So I would say recruit like getting a referral for consulting, honestly, not that important. I was part of the hiring committee at Accenture too, and a referral meant diddly squat, honestly. Like there was such a strong recruiting presence like on campus that you didn't really need that. Now here's about Google and Facebook and other companies. You probably may have noticed that Google like doesn't actually come to campus like consulting firms or even some investment banks do. This is a conscientious effort to avoid biases towards target schools. I think a big problem with consulting firms is that you see a lot of folks from the same places over and over again. And I think what's really cool about Google is like within my cohort, They're kids from schools I've never even heard of. And I actually think that's awesome because it gives a lot of underrepresented students a chance to shine. Now, to be a little more selfish, that does mean that it's harder for Cal students to recruit because Google's casting a wider net, which means that yes, you probably will have to be more strategic and intentional with networking. My advice is, you could find me on LinkedIn. You could find other APMMs from Cal. Reach out to us, connect. Sometimes we're really busy, but sometimes you'll catch us at the right moment. I'll tell you right now, a part of the job, when you're in product launch mode, you're working 60 to like 100 hours a week. At any other period of time, you're working like 20 to 40 hours a week. So catch me after Christmas and I'll be working like 20 to 30 hours a week. Best time to reach out to me, for instance. That's probably too late for the internship, for applying to the internship, honestly. So my advice is reach out to as many APMMs who are Cal alums or, just from other schools in general. And hopefully you'll get lucky and you'll catch them at a right time. I've actually been on like, I think 10 coffee chats. Even though I'm busy, I try to make time to chat with students whenever I can. I've been on like 10 coffee chats since I started Google. Sometimes I try to invite students actually to come to the Google office. So yeah, I mean, take a chance. Talk to folks. You'll never know who bites. That's my advice for cold emailing folks. LinkedIn is great. Send a personalized invite. Don't just like send a connect request and hope that we pick up on the hint. Send a personalized invite. Once we connect, like write a more in-depth, like kind of like cold email write-up. If we don't respond to you in 1 week, you could send a follow-up. If we don't after that, don't send a follow-up. Just assume that person's really busy and they just don't have the time. But yeah, besides that, reach out to Cal alum and don't just talk to folks at like Google. Talk to folks like all over. But yeah.
Right, thank you. So you also mentioned the timing, so that's why I've been telling students to do the networking actually ahead of time, be proactive before you actually need that conversation, need that referral. All right, so 2 more questions. I hope you still remember some of the courses that you take, Cal. So for students who are interested in product marketing, do you have any course that you enjoy a lot that you would recommend students to take?
So I was looking at these questions beforehand in advance. And I actually caught up with a lot of my Cal friends at Google at lunch today in the cafe. And I was like sharing the questions and we were talking about like, oh, what would be helpful for Cal students? And we all laughed when we saw this question because I hate to do Haas like this. And like I love Haas. Like it's great. I'm really lucky. To be perfectly honest with you, and hopefully like Haas like invites me for future things. Like hopefully it's like I'm not like making fun of it too much. But honestly, I would say there's no specific classes you need to take at Berkeley or at Haas to prepare you for this role. There's some good and there's some bad. The bad may be like, oh, like maybe you were hoping that there was like some like class that could like teach you all the tips and tricks you need to kind of excel in the role. I think the good news is that there really is, and I stress, really is no concrete like knowledge, learnings, or skills you need to succeed on the role. Really, like I could teach you how to write. I could teach you how to run the social media account. They taught me in like less than a day. I could teach you how to build beautiful slides. I could teach you how to work with PMs and like scope out products. I could teach you how to conduct feature prioritization, competitive analysis, market mapping, like all that marketing mojo. We actually even have a intensive 2-week boot camp where we teach you all those skills beforehand to get you ready for the job, which is basically like a class in and of itself. This is all to say, I think Google does a good job teaching those skills to you. You just need to be ready to come in with a hungry appetite to learn and learn from your peers and learn from your mentors. Obviously, coming in with those skills beforehand is great. Like it's going to be easier. It's kind of like the learning curve won't be as steep for you. So, I would say like if you're in Haas, the core classes prepare you really well. Any marketing elective is going to prepare you really well. I would recommend marketing strategy. I don't know who's teaching that anymore. It was Robinson. Not sure if he's still around there. But marketing strategy, consumer behavior, and brand strategy and management, definitely great class. I think that's UGBA 162A. Definitely a great class just for brand in general. But in terms of like actual specific like classes like you must take, yeah. And I think that's a good.
Thank you, Bryan. So I think you also give a lot of additional advice to students who would like to get into tech already. So we have 10 more minutes. I just would like to open up to our audience, and I recognize some familiar faces, which is good. So I'd like to invite you to either unmute yourself or you type in the chat to ask any question that you would like to hear from Bryan. I do see there is a question here. So how do your strategic slash finance background or knowledge help you now as a product marketer in tech?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kunji. I would say because of my background, my team, they joke about it. They like unfairly dump a lot of like more analytical work on me. So for instance, I actually own the budget for my entire team, which is like 100 people in New York, San Francisco, and London. So it's kind of scary because when I look at like the PO box, which is like just like our budget handling internal system, that's like it's like $50 million like for a team budget, and it's very scary looking at that money and thinking like, oh my god, I have to like manage this. What does that actually mean tactically or operationally? It means like I'm constantly nagging people to like input their costs. I'm constantly tracking revenues generated, sales generated across different teams and product lines. Every single month, I lead the all hands budget meeting, where I actually co-present with the VP of marketing, and we talk about like budget goals, priorities, where is there a deficit, where is there a surplus. I think because of my finance background, they assumed that I'd be comfortable with like modeling, financial modeling and budget, like and like actual like FP&A work. Unfortunately, I am. So like that was a fair assumption to make. I would say because of that, I like, but I think the good thing is they trust me with a key work stream, like in actually managing the team. And I would say if for anybody who wants to like build a startup, for anybody who wants to be like a director or VP level at one of these firms, you have to know how to run a budget, and you have to learn how to be comfortable managing like 10 $100 million plus budgets, and you have to be comfortable nagging people and kind of recording and being a strong project manager. So I would say that's one thing. Another thing I do a lot is market sizing, um, and like market mapping. So like when we're about to launch a product, we're constantly like building estimations and valuations for like how much revenue will we capture within a given market. So I build a lot of quantitative models when I have time, especially doing like future projections. I would say a lot of APMMs and PMMs don't have that skill set. So I think it's a big reason why like our team is a lot more forward looking now, because we definitely are like a lot more data driven and a lot more numbers driven than some other teams at Google. But yeah, I would say like those are kind of the two things where like my background has definitely been I've been a big help.
Thank you. So Allison, you're up.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for giving all this advice. I wanted to ask, so I see what you're saying by like asking for more responsibility. That could be a wild journey learning all sorts of things. But also like once you've gotten the responsibility, you're like, oh my gosh, how do I handle this? How would you say like you should go about like once you're given the task, you're like, okay, now go. How do you handle that with all that pressure, but also like where do you seek guidance, and how do you know like you're seeking just the right amount of guidance without making it clear that someone else should be handling the task, if that makes sense?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think it's something that I wish college would teach you, but it doesn't. You find that out post grad. And the tricky thing for this is that how I answer would depend on the role, the team, the company culture. For instance, in consulting and investment banking, I think, again, not to be too mean, but a lot of the folks are like, yeah, like there are no dumb questions. But then you proceed to ask a dumb question and they like give you the stink eye and the resting bitch face. And like, anyways, it's like, it's very hostile sometimes. I will say though, in a tech company, when they say you could ask dumb questions, like they actually really do mean that. Like I found like in consulting and investment banking, I've been so hardwired to like apologize for certain things. When I did that in a meeting at Google, where I was like, oh, like I'm so sorry, like I missed a deadline like by half a day. My manager literally stopped me in the middle of a meeting. It's like, we don't do that here. Like we don't apologize. Like it's more than okay. And I think it's such a more warm culture. And my manager actually, like in my one-on-one today, she pulled me aside and she was like, you know, you could ask more questions. And like it never came to my mind that like a lot of my subconscious biases to like kind of like be more cautious and more risk averse for my days in consulting and investment banking carried over into tech. Like I truly mean this. Like, and I'm still learning this myself, so may sound like a bit of a hypocrite for saying this, but break out of your shell. Do not be afraid to ask questions. If you are struggling with a task, ask, like tell your manager up front. It is way better to tell your manager that you're struggling and need support than for you to kind of be silent and chug along until the day of launch and you're missing a key work stream and it's a failure and everybody's saying like, oh my God, like what happened? How could this possibly go wrong? And it's traced back to you because you didn't ask a question like 3 months ago. So I would say, you know, be proactive, reach out to your manager, schedule weekly one-on-ones with your team lead, set expectations early on, ask them what their communication style is, ask them like, can we meet once a week to go over like goals, tasks, asks. And like, I think when you have like such consistent one-on-ones with them on a weekly or monthly basis, you will get to know a bit of what their communication style is, as well as kind of their tolerance for questions. But I would say for the most part, people at Google are and tech in general are very nice. So lean more on the side of what's the opposite of caution, whatever that is. Lean more on that than caution. Is my TLD.
I see. Okay. Thank you so much. That really helps because it's hard to know sometimes. So it's good to get that insight.
No, definitely.
All right. Thank you. Kabir, you ready?
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Brian, for all the information. I just had a question on, I know you're talking about like for product marketing, like when you're applying for those jobs, you don't need to have the skills because like they'll teach you on the job. But for something like, I don't know if you know for like product management, like how necessary it is to have like those skills in college when applying for those positions? Like, is that a lot different than product marketing where it's not as necessary to have those skills?
Yeah, I would say great question. The more technical the role, the more like strict requirements there will be. So like for a PM position, especially at Google, PMs at some companies are more business focused. At Google, it's like very technical. So I would say like there probably are like it's more restricted in the sense that there are key skills and requirements you need to hit. For the APM program at Google, or for the APM program, definitely much more loose. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right, cool. So, Aram?
Yeah, hi. So first of all, thank you, Brian, for coming on. I know you mentioned a lot of pressure that could sometimes mount up when you're working. So I just want to ask, like, what are some ways you relieve that stress or some things you do for fun in general?
Yeah, no, I love this question because I think especially at Cal, there is an over-indexing on academics and coursework and extracurriculars. And I think it's so easy to get lost in the grind and you transfer these really bad habits into work. A lot of my friends have been ground out across industries. Like one of my friends was in private equity and worked 100 hours for like years on end. And now he's in Peru shearing alpaca wool. I'm not making this up. He's on sabbatical. Like he literally it's way better to like take a 10-minute YouTube break like frequently and then like blow like 2 years in like Peru or like the Andes or wherever have you to like re-spiritually like connect yourself in your core. But anyways, that aside, what do I like to do? My roommates make fun of me because they always say I spend more time on YouTube than actually working. Such bad advice for like for college students. But honestly, like take time. Like don't like do not stare at your screen all day. Actually, then I said YouTube. Anyways, don't stare at your screen all day. Like actually hang out with friends, make time for friends and for family and for loved ones. The rule I subscribe to is I do 30 minutes of work followed by a 10-minute break, 30 minutes of work, 10-minute break, etc. The only exception is if I'm in back-to-back meetings. If I'm in meetings, I always at the end of every meeting, I treat myself to a 10-minute break. And I found this has done wonders for my mental health. Just having a very like systematic, rigorous like approach to like break time. Obviously, when I'm in the middle of product launch, I may not be able to subscribe to this. So sometimes I'll make exceptions. Like for instance, like right now I'm incredibly busy and I probably can't be as liberal with like my breaks. But I'd say the great thing about like a APMM role or PMM role at Google is, like I mentioned, during product launch, very intense. Post-product launch, very chill. It also helps that like, I think when after your post-product launch, your manager actually encourages you to like chat with folks from other teams and like learn from other folks and take those best practices into your team. So you're basically like being paid by your team to just go out and talk to new people, and it's like encouraged. So again, I think there are personal tactics you could use to kind of take care of your mental health, but also like hopefully your employer also does a good job taking care of you too and giving you the space and energy you need to take care of yourself.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I know it's already 5. So I have Carissa. Can you quickly let us know what question you have?
Yes. Well, first, thank you so much, Brian. And my question was, it sounds like you've pivoted from a lot of different roles. So what makes you kind of stay in PMM, and do you plan on looking for exit opportunities?
Yeah. And I'll answer this question, then I'll very quickly answer Caitlin's question in the comments. But I think some people have different philosophies. Like some people want to like stick to a job and stay by it. I think Google's an example of a company where there are people on my team that have been at Google for like 15 years. Like they've never changed jobs and like this is it. This is their dream job and this is what they want to do. Something tells me I'm not that kind of person based on my track record. I think for me, like ultimately, and I've been very candid with my manager and with my teams as well, which I really appreciate that they value that transparency. But for me personally, I think a big goal of mine is to like either join or build a high growth early stage startup and then make my way into VC. I think what I love about my experience in IB consulting and now in product marketing is I've like slowly but surely I'm learning how to build a business from the ground up and what that operationally looks like across key areas, whether that's in actually like the strategy portion of like building a vision and then articulating it, and the finance side where it comes to like building a budget, managing that, and understanding like M&A and other growth levers. And now in marketing, it's understanding how to like really grow and scale a business, a product, and how to really understand what the voice of customer is and truly embody it. So I would say like slowly but surely, I'm picking up like key business skills I hope to like apply in kind of like the ideal mid-stage, late-stage career pivot. But I think one thing I learned in college is that nothing is ever set in stone. When I came into college, I thought that I would be a data scientist working on like election systems, like in poli-sci. I thought I'd be a consultant once upon a time. I thought I'd be an investment banker. Now I'm very removed from those spheres. Like now I might hire an investment banker, I might hire a consultant, but that's like as close as it gets to like interacting with that field ever again. This is all to say, like, I think in college, you may think there's a predetermined path to success when there is not. It's kind of like, okay, I don't know why I'm making this reference, but like, if you watch like Loki or like in Loki and like the MCU, it's like there is a multiverse of probabilities. There is no like one sacred timeline. There's no like one path you must take that defines your success. There is an unlimited number of options up to your disposal. It is on you and sometimes a bit of luck to get there. But I think to get you there is your support network. Alumni are here to chat and help. Some alumni aren't. I learned the hard way. But I'd say most alumni are very nice and they're willing to reach out to you. Karen and the Career Center, fantastic resources again to draw upon. Angelica, who was supposed to be here instead of me, actually does like host a lot of great resources for career and recruiting prep. You can also reach out to her. She does coffee chats individually. So shout out to Angelica. But again, like there are amazing support networks. And if you leverage them, who knows what happens? Really quickly, Caitlin's question. Yeah, there's actually a meme that was like in the Zoom memes for self-quarantines. And there's like this one comment that actually, I think did a really good job pointing this out. When they say that you need all those things, you only need 60% of those to be considered competitive for the job. Now, for the 10 years experience thing, I think the rule like me and my friends usually see and that we see applied a lot is just have half the experience or 60%, just like with the work qualifications and you're already competitive. One of my friends actually applied for a lead PMM position at Square. It required like 10 years of experience and he only has like 4. But again, he got it. So yeah, there's no hard and fast rules on like how many years of experience you need or what skills you need. Again, it's all about the story you tell and the passion and conviction you have that follows that.
All right. Thank you so much, Bryan.